I really like teaching. So I had this kind of teachery, voice that wasn't quite myself. It wasn't as like, it didn't have the same character that I do. And it got tiring really fast. It's hard to pretend to be something else. So I find that I just can't not share these stories because it's a part of my experience and I'm gonna write about it.
Welcome to Who Cares About My Story, the podcast on how sharing your personal brand story can impact your business. We will explore the perks and also the behind-the-scenes challenges of figuring out what to share. I'm your host, Reme Mancera, a personal brand strategist who loves finding the story connectors that illustrate the benefits of what you offer. And by the way, you don't need a Hollywood style for that. In case you ever wonder, remember, your story is relevant and worth telling. Hey there! I am delighted to bring you today's episode. Our guest is Sarah Jane Burt, a content strategist and copywriter with more than 12 years of experience working with big and small brands. From multi-billion-dollar tech companies like IBM to executive leadership coaches and even an international churro franchise, she has written content for over 300 businesses. She uses ethical marketing to help people tell their stories and make money with their content. In this episode, she shares how a casual conversation at a party led to her first copywriting gig and flipped her anticipated career path. She also explains why it was a competitive advantage for her to have a background in humanities rather than marketing. Sarah recalls when she was not real in her content and what she did to reflect her true voice and genuine way of speaking. Don't miss this interview. Learn how Sarah decides whether or not to share a story and what question she asks herself to decide. Now, let's start. Welcome to Who Cares About My Story. I am delighted to have you here, Sarah. Thank you for accepting my invitation.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Let's start by if you can tell us what you do.
Sure. So I'm a copywriter and content strategist. So I help people a lot of the times tell their story, but also make money with their content.
Nice. So how did you get there? What's your story?
Yeah, so I have kind of an interesting, or at least I've been told an interesting like origin story. So I was in grad school for English. I thought I wanted to be a teacher. So I was getting my master's in English and I wasn't sure about teaching, but I figured I'll figure it out. And I met a guy at a party who owned a tech business that made they did like managed tech, but they also created websites for like local businesses. So I met this guy, I thought he was cute. I was chatting with him, told him I was in grad school. And then he said, so you're in grad school for English, so you're a good writer. And I was like, I guess, yeah. And he's like, do you think you could write website copy? And I had never really thought about copywriting as a job, had never really thought about writing as a job, even though I loved to do it. I just didn't think there was like a career in that. So that was the very first copywriting gig I got, was writing website copy. I had to teach myself SEO. I had to teach myself a lot of stuff about copywriting. But I took to it very quickly. And then after I got out of grad school, I got a job with an agency. And then from there, I just kind of always had a job in content marketing.
Nice. Thank you for sharing. I listened to an interview that you did, and I listened to this story with this Italian guy, and that is funny. And kind of it's moments like that, like something that happened, and it's like triggering a new path in your career. So it's always interesting. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
And what about writing? How you got into writing at the beginning?
Yeah. So writing, when I was in high school, I thought I wanted to write books. And then when I got into college, I took creative writing courses. And I realized I really didn't like writing fiction. It was really hard for me to write the dialogue because it always just felt fake. But I was really into creative nonfiction. So like memoir type stuff or like journalism type stuff. That was easier for me because when you're recalling an actual conversation, it feels more authentic. So I did a lot of that in undergrad, and then being an English major, I wrote a lot of like literary analysis. So I learned how to kind of I gained a lot of like just critical thinking skills from grad school, and being able to kind of like analyze things and figure out why they are the way they are. I learned a lot about writing argument because that's what those papers were. You were arguing some kind of thesis. And then I actually taught college writing for freshmen. I did that for like 5 years. So I really got into the mechanics of not necessarily copywriting, but just the fundamentals of good writing, good argument, like how to debate, how to research, how to like basically win arguments, but also convince people of things. So that translated really easily to copywriting. I think also because my background is not necessarily in marketing, a lot of what I've learned has been from positions that I had. I think that brings kind of a unique take to it. So my content is often more like storytelling than just what you would think of as advertising. So I think that definitely like has helped me create kind of my own style, coming from both an academic standpoint, but then also having that creative writing background. But yeah, I mean, I've always liked writing. I've written, was writing stories in third grade. Um, this is funny to me. I was writing these like horror stories, like
Mhm.
Goosebumps type stories whenever I was in like grade school. So yeah, I mean, I thought it was gonna be, I was gonna be an author or like a journalist or something, but I just find that I don't know, my skills are really suited for this. Um, I enjoy working with businesses. I've always kind of been entrepreneurial minded, so I enjoy that aspect of it as well. But yeah, it kind of just like you said, the perfect moment happened, this random moment that got me, on this path to doing this.
Mm. Yeah, and I like that you bring the idea of the not advertising and not because I have read how you are getting a different approach. Is like we doesn't need to be so aggressive, doesn't need to
Mhm.
be about uh, making people understand things that they are not real and all that. So I would love to know how you got into that situation where you realize, like, yeah, I am not going into that way of doing things. I am doing my own.
Yeah, so I think part of that is not being trained as a marketer initially. So coming from a humanities background where a lot of what you learn, a lot of the classes you take are human centered. So they're around humans, their stories, their passions, like art, culture, all that stuff. So I think coming from that background, and also just I have a lot of empathy. I think that kind of like informed the way that I do things. So yeah, I think maybe if I would have learned like the old copywriting techniques that have been used for like 30 years, it might have taken me longer to get to where I am. But I think because I didn't know the rules, it was very easy to break them without like being concerned about it. And yeah, I found that I've written content for like over 300 companies at this point, just through freelance and then my full-time positions. And I've never had an experience where I wrote the way that I write and it did not have some kind of successful outcome. Like no one's ever come back to me and said, no, we have to make this really pushy, you know. And now I have the luxury of only taking clients who understand and appreciate the way that I write. But yeah, I think it's really just like comes from the inside. I don't want to be mean to people. I kind of hate pushy advertising. I hate pushy salespeople. I think a lot of it is manipulative. And there's a different way to do things. And if it gets you the same outcome, why not care about people?
Yeah. Being kind, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing that. I also have a similar point of view where you don't need to be aggressive. You don't need to pretend to be someone else. I am into
Mhm.
personal brand because of that, because of you are bringing just who you are. You are highlighting certain parts, but it's
Mhm.
from who you are. So
Yeah.
you don't need to pretend. So please share how sharing your story has impacted your business.
Yeah. So I find that a lot of people just sharing stories on a regular basis, maybe not necessarily how I got into writing, but sharing just stories of what it's like to be an entrepreneur and all those things. I find that people often will connect with me on a personal level before they will on a like marketing level. So a lot of people just they want to read the content and then they're like, oh, she's a copywriter, like I like her work, I'd like to, work with her. But it's more of that personal connection that like gets people in. Not that that's necessarily a tactic. I mean it is, but I personally like I tried having a very different brand voice from my own when I first went full time in 2020, because prior to that, this was a part-time thing. I didn't really have to market. It was all referrals. And so I really like teaching. So I had this kind of teachery, voice that wasn't quite myself. It wasn't as like, it didn't have the same character that I do. And it got tiring really fast. It's hard to pretend to be something else. So I find that I just can't not share these stories because it's a part of my experience and I'm gonna write about it. So although I think that is a great tactic for connecting with people on a personal level, I don't always talk business because sometimes it's the human element that you're making that connection, not necessarily like how you're going to help their business. And often those posts for me are the ones that do the best when I talk about like how hard it is to be an entrepreneur. I've talked about like mental health is a big part of my journey. Um, and people just appreciate the realness. They can identify with pieces of that. So it definitely has helped my business since I've kind of gotten to find where my voice is and just stopped caring about if people didn't like me or think I was weird or something. Once I stopped caring about that and just kind of shared what I wanted to share, it got really easy to write things because I wasn't like trying to hold myself back from, sharing certain things. It's not like I share everything. There's a fine line between what you share, but I share openly, and I don't really hold back any of I think the failures are just as important as the successes. And a lot of the time we see everyone's success, but they don't talk about what it took to get there. And so I think people really resonate with just like the human aspect of stories.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I have several thoughts on what you share now. But what I would like to highlight, since you are now like finding the voice of others, so you write in their style, it's so
Hmm.
important that you also do the same in your own
Hmm.
brand. I feel like this coherence, like you are helping others to do that. It's not so easy for ourselves when it's
Yeah,
like
it's hard.
us.
Yeah.
So did you get help to help you figure it out how to do it, or were you just intentional about this? How was the process?
Yeah, so I kind of it took someone else to point out that my voice didn't sound like me, like in person.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a coach that, she pointed out, she's like, you're actually funny and none of this comes through. So that's when I really stopped to think about it. And I I mean, I did some of the work that I have my clients do in terms of like finding their brand voice, thinking about like how do I want people to think of me or describe me from my content, but really a lot of it was just writing how I sound. You know what I mean? Writing and just getting it out. And yes, I'll edit it so that I tend to blather on and on. So I always edit it to be more concise. Um, but I don't edit out the like little pieces of my personality that find their way in there. And I think it's more difficult for brands that aren't personal brands, because they have to create this voice, which is probably a lot like their own voice, but modified a bit. I think it's more challenging for them because they can't just write how they write and then edit themselves. But yeah, for me, I did a lot of the exercises that I have my clients do. Um, but it took someone else from the outside saying, this doesn't really align with, who you are and what you sound like, for me to realize like, oh, for some reason I was creating this person that I'm not, and writing in that way versus, how I would actually talk and explain something to somebody.
Mm. Yeah, and it's kind of funny how when that other person point out, it was just a moment to check out, and it's like, oh yes, like
Yeah.
quickly you realize about that, but sometimes you need someone else to just point it, so you stop and check it like from an outside their perspective, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it always helps to have an outside perspective, on even if it's something you're good at and that you do, like the writing that I do is always better if I have an editor look at it before it goes out. Um, and that's not because I can't edit my own work. It's because you tend to glaze over things when, you're in it. So I think it always helps, even if you're a good writer, it always helps to have someone else look at it and see like, does this align with my voice? Like, is this real? Like, what do you feel when you read this? Like, it's different. People are more, I feel like, also more protective of their own writing. So having an outside opinion kind of um, unbiased feedback, whereas you might make certain choices because you feel a certain way. It always helps to have somebody on the outside.
Mm, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, you share how for you is important. I have read also something about that in your content about the mental health.
Hmm.
So, have you ever worried about oversharing or sharing too much, or how you set your boundaries in privacy?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's not an easy answer to it. Um, I I always write things. If it's something that's really important to me and very personal, I'll always sit on it. So I'll write it, read it over, and then kind of decide, is this something I just needed to get out? Or is this something that, if I share this, will it benefit someone else? So sometimes when you write something, you're passionate about something, or somebody has pissed you off or something, and you write, it all comes out. Sometimes you read it over and you're like, no one's going to get anything out of this. So that's kind of where I draw the line in terms of, is this something that's going to help somebody? Is someone going to get something out of this besides me? Or was this just venting or just like journaling type of thing? Um, And I think also you kind of have to decide what pieces of your life do you want to share. So I have clients that might be mothers, but that's not a part of their what they talk about. Um, or clients that might have some kind of, they might be like have to present as more professional, like they don't want to share some of the personal stuff. I think you just have to make a decision, is this part of myself that I share, or is this something that's just for me, and for people who are close to me? But I don't think there's an easy answer to it, because I think sometimes people think they're oversharing when they're really just sharing for the first time something that's beyond surface level. And then I think some people do overshare to the point where people are just turned off by the oversharing. Like that's not something that, you know, so yeah, I think it's a challenge, but that's basically what I do, is like give it some time and then decide if I want to post it or not. But just writing it sometimes is helpful, and then I can, put it away in my Google Drive and never look at it again.
Mhm. I think that's an awesome advice. The one about just asking yourself if it's something that will provide values to someone else, or inspire or resonate with someone. And also, I would love to know your opinion on this, but I have the feeling that it's also an evolution, because sometimes you are not ready to go deep in certain topics, but with time, you will see the benefit for your audience on sharing about certain topics or certain stories. And then after realizing that, you'll see the benefit of the feedback that you get and the interaction from your audience. And then from there, it's like, yeah, it makes sense that I go a little bit into this. And of course, always like share, respecting your own boundaries and what feels comfortable and right to you. But yeah, I think sometimes with the feedback, you also see the actual impact of sharing specific stories.
Yeah, definitely. I have one client who says her like what she's decided on how whether or not she shares something is it something I've healed from or something I'm still working to heal? And she said for the most part, if I'm still working to heal, I'm still working through it. It's probably not going to be something I share unless that process of thinking about it and talking about it is gonna maybe help others also heal from it. Otherwise, she kind of waits until she has processed it, thought about it, and then writes about it then. So it's still the same, maybe not the same impact. It still has an impact. It's just different when you're talking about something when you're in the middle of it versus like having time to reflect. I think that is a good way to think about it for people who are very afraid of oversharing or don't want to, are not sure, like, should I share this or not? If it's something that's happened in the past that you've had time to reflect on and figure out, that's valuable. That's still valuable. You don't have to talk about things that you're actively working on if that feels like oversharing.
Hmm. Yeah, and what I have found also really useful for clients to explain how to deal with that is like you can put the focus on the lesson that you get, and not so much into the details of specific
Hmm.
situations, specific moments. But the lesson is powerful, so go into that and you just go just superficial explanation of the
Hmm.
situation. You don't need to go into the nitty gritty, but the lesson is something valuable. So it makes sense bringing that to your audience. So I would like to know if you found some unexpected challenges when you started like sharing pieces of your story.
Huh. Um, I don't really think so. I think the only challenge is like, what do I share and what do I not share? Um, And if I'm ever like, I'm not sure, I just don't share it, but I'll save it in case, there's time for that later. But I haven't really bumped into anyone like being mean or like, trolling me. I haven't really ran into any of that. It's more of a personal challenge of how much do I share? Um, how many details do I provide, or is it more of like a superficial thing? And that's really been the biggest challenge, is just figuring out what feels comfortable to me. And what feels comfortable to me may not feel comfortable to someone else. Um, but yeah, I haven't really gotten any, which is lucky because people are mean. And I haven't really gotten any you know, mean feedback from people on the internet about, I shouldn't be talking about this or anything like that. So I think I think I'm lucky in that regard. I think a lot of people are afraid of that, having feedback that's not what they expected. Um but it's not something I've run into yet, luckily.
Mm. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, because sometimes, as you say, it's not just the external challenges, but the internal
Hmm.
decisions, no? That is like, okay, what to share or not. So yeah. Yeah, I would like to know, because I know that you started on 2011,
Hmm.
your business. Okay.
Hmm.
Can you talk us about a pivotal moment in your business?
Yeah, so I think the pivotal moment in my business was when I went full time.
Mm-hmm.
So from 2011 to 2020, I always had a full-time job, and then I would have clients on the side. Um, so and as I got closer to 2020, I was making more and more money, but it was never really something that I was ready to do, to go full time. And then in 2020, I lost my full-time job, and it was like July of 2020. So um, I was not probably not going to get another job anytime soon. People were worried about the pandemic and, cutting back their budgets and stuff. And marketing, for some reason, is always the first thing to go. Um, so I thought, okay, I guess I have to make this work full time. Um, and what is interesting is in 2018, something similar happened to me. I got laid off from a job I had had for a couple of years, and I had just moved to Austin, which is, the cost of living here is a lot more than what I was used to in Florida. So I had just moved here. I had just spent all this money on furniture and stuff, and then I got laid off. And in 2018, I reacted to it differently than I did in 2020. And I don't know if it's just because it was a pandemic. And so my thought was, I gotta do, I gotta do what I gotta do. But in 2018, I got really depressed. It took me 5 months to find another job because the job market's really competitive here. Um, and I wasn't really able, I had thought about taking my business full time, but I wasn't really able to serve clients in that state. So I actually like lessened the amount of clients I had so that I could focus on finding a job. But in 2020, it was just like, okay, guess I'm doing this. And it worked out for the best. I pretty much, like, that first year, like 10x'd my revenue. Um, and so I think that was the pivotal point of like, oh, I can do this full time, because in 2018, I felt like my mental health was something that was going to hold me back from doing it full time, which is fine if that was the case. I had kind of decided that's fine. Not everyone is, cut out to have a business full time. And there's different seasons, like maybe right now is not the time. But I think 2020 showed me like I can do this full time. I kind of can do things that I like am determined to do, um, in a way that, like, working in corporate, I never really got that feeling because there was never anything, my survival was not on the line because I had a job, with
Mm.
benefits and all of that stuff. So that was pretty much, definitely a pivotal moment in my business because, um, it's like I didn't want to do it, but I felt like I had to.
Were you like sharing during the process with your audience how you decide and what in which level did you share about this?
Yeah, so prior to going full time in my business, I didn't really do a lot of marketing or audience building. I just kind of got referrals. So there wasn't really an audience to share with. I definitely, in reflecting, have shared a lot of this because a lot of people are in the same boat. I met a lot of people who started a business in 2020 because their hours got cut or they got laid off. So I definitely shared a lot of that when I first started building my audience, but when it was actually happening, I didn't really have an audience to share it with. But definitely people resonated with that because they were in a similar space and kind of feeling the same challenges I was. So yes, as I was audience building, I was talking about these things. And it's still something I share now because I think a lot of people they want to leave their 9 to 5 and run a business full time. I never wanted that. I wanted to have my full-time job and my little side gig that like allowed me to be more creative and like do other things. I did not want to leave my 9 to 5. I was comfortable there in a way that like served me, you know.
Yeah.
I don't want to be constantly challenged, especially with my mental health issues. Like I don't want to constantly have to struggle to do something, and that the full-time job is what helped me kind of build the business, have my needs met. And so yeah, I still share that story because not everyone, I don't know, a lot of business coaches will give the advice like quit your 9 to 5, quit your 9 to 5. And I'm like, no, keep your job as long as you possibly can. Save some money, and you'll know when it's the right time. I was forced into it. I don't recommend that for anybody. But definitely like it's something I still talk about because I think it's important to see different experiences and recognize that there's not just one way to build a business. There's not one way to come to your business. There are different seasons of your business. You might have to take a job for a while when you're in a slow season. So I just think it's important to kind of share that stuff because you see so much of the same story, like, oh, I finally quit my 9 to 5 and I had freedom or whatever. But for me, I was working remote since 2016. I was working in like higher level positions. I was making 6 figures. I was working remotely whenever I wanted to, you know what I mean? Within reason. No one was breathing down my neck. I loved my full-time job. You know what I mean? I didn't have the same experience as some people who their business is their way to time freedom and money freedom. I had all that. So I just want, I want people to see that there's no one right way. And if someone makes you feel like you have to get to what you want in one way, it's probably not a good person to take advice from.
Yeah, I love that you shared that. And this is one of the reasons why I started this podcast to create a space where we can see different ways of
Mm-hmm.
how you think about how to share your story, but also how to make business can be different from anyone else. And how it, to me, is really important to define your own version of
Mm-hmm.
success. It doesn't need to be what is for other person. It needs to be what is important to you. So have a thought about that, and doesn't matter what others are talking about. And how, as you said, like, yeah, you were forced to that, but not in 2020, in 2018, that you
Right.
were not ready. So it's also when you felt ready or when was the right time for you. So I was also having a process. I quit my job, but I get a part-time at the
Mm-hmm.
beginning, so I can build my business in a way where I don't feel the pressure of I need to get clients from the day one. I can do both of the things and finding my way. So yeah, absolutely. I would love her more different and diverse ways of making it. For everyone else, anyone has their own way,
Hmm.
and how important is that? Yeah, I absolutely agree on that. So yeah, and I would like to ask you one more question.
Hmm.
So, what would you say is the part of your personal brand story that surprises most the people most?
I think that I worked in corporate for almost a decade. So I had jobs in agencies, which I don't think surprises people. But I also I worked for IBM for a while, which is like a multi-billion dollar company and not necessarily a company that you think of when you think like, oh, personality packed content, you know? So I think that surprises people, and people tend to forget that I have that corporate background, because my own personal voice and stories are so like not stuffy, not corporate feeling. Um, but I think there's room for any business to have personality in their content. It doesn't necessarily have to be dropping F-bombs and referencing Taylor Swift or something. You know what I mean? That doesn't have to look one way either. I think it doesn't matter what you do, you can sell widgets, industrial equipment. And I think you can still have personality. You can still have a powerful story. Even if you're not a personal brand. So I think people just kind of get this idea of like, oh, corporate is like so, you know, not accessible or whatever. But that's part of why I did so well in corporate in the tech industry, is because a lot of it is like buzzwords, difficult to understand, doesn't really say anything, or says something, but it's speaking to like a developer who has this vocabulary. And a lot of the times in tech, you're speaking to both the developer and the CEO, who's more business minded, less tech minded. A lot of the times did not build the tech. You know what I mean? They've been hired because of their business background. So I was able to break it down in language that, people could understand, didn't have to struggle to understand. And so I think it's not surprising if you actually think about it, because I think every brand can have, you know, a unique voice and a unique story. But I think people get in their head like, oh, corporate, that's no fun. But I enjoyed my time in corporate. I learned a lot. I got to work with a lot of people, like learn from other people. I think it makes me 1,000 times better at what I do. But yeah, it does surprise people sometimes.
That's interesting. And yeah, when you break it like that, it's like, yeah, it makes a lot of sense that they really need your help
Yeah.
because you are the one translating from these difficult to understand expressions and terms to something that people understand. And it's
Hmm.
like in every business, we need to make people understand what we do or what we offer. So bringing stories will help to illustrate that, the benefits and what is exactly what you are offering. So
Hmm.
yeah, absolutely. The I see how they could benefit, especially from having a fresh angle from.
Hmm.
So it's not someone that is a developer or a
Yeah.
CEO of someone else that can mix all those concepts and bring in something new. So thank you for sharing that. So, yeah, thank you for this. Please tell us how they can find out more about you and what you do.
Yeah. So my website is just my name, sarahjaneburt.com. Um, I'm most active on LinkedIn, so I'd love to connect with people. And yeah, that's probably the best place to find me. Sarah Jane Burt is what I am on there as well.
Awesome. So, thank you very much. This has been a pleasure. And yeah, I hope the audience really also enjoyed this and your perspective on this and how you have share your story and what impact has in your business. So thank you very much. Thanks for tuning in to Who Cares About My Story, the podcast on how sharing your personal brand story can impact your business. If you found this episode valuable, consider subscribing or leaving a review. Your feedback means a lot. Did something resonate with you today? Please share your thoughts on the podcast platform or on your socials. I would love to hear from you and give you a shout out. Just tag me on Instagram at Reme Mancera. I can't wait for you to meet our next guest. Until then, remember, your story is relevant and worth telling.